Hello, future homeowners. I am so excited to be here as part of your homebuyer education class, and I just can't tell you how much my passion is lying with you and your first time homebuyer experience. And it might not just be your first home, it might be your first investment property, it might be your first condo, it might be your first second home, it might be your first fourplex. Any of these just thrill me to be part of this experience with you. Now, one of the things I want to ask you today, though, is what the heck does all of this mean? 680, 725, 450, 812, 678, 720. What does all of that mean to you? Well, that might mean your future. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, what is your credit score? I want you to close your eyes for just a second and imagine this with me. Go ahead, close your eyes. Now, I want you to imagine traveling down that street of your perfect neighborhood. Well, someone else is driving because your eyes are closed, right? I want you to imagine what that neighborhood looks like. I want you to imagine pulling into the driveway of that home, that you see the yard, and it's exactly what you dreamed of. You walk up to the front door and you can just imagine all your friends and family walking in that front door into your home. I want you to imagine opening up that door after a long day of work, what you're going to see. You've got the perfect home. You've got the number of bedrooms that you wanted, the number of bathrooms, that kitchen that you can just imagine cooking your family meals in. You've got the right neighborhood. You're near the right schools if you have children, or maybe not near the right schools if you don't have children. And this is it. It's in the right price range. You know you can afford the payments. You have a good job. Your income is steady. You have enough money to close. You've been working hard at this for a long time. And the realtor says, okay, go to your lender. Make sure that you get your pre-qualification letter, bring it back to me, and we'll write up the offer on this home. You maybe have a little bit of anticipation just because you're having to go have somebody else tell you yes or no. But you pay your bills on time, you know that you're in pretty good shape as far as credit goes, and you feel this is all right. This is going to work. So you could walk into your lender, you sit down, and that your lender says, yes, your income is perfect. Yes, this price range is perfect. Here's your monthly payments. You can afford them. It's almost what you're paying in rent. So what the heck could go wrong except your dreams are blown because your credit score doesn't equal what the loan program requires. So what happened? What's going on? That's what we're going to talk about today. How do you make sure this dream never gets blown? All right, open your eyes. Everybody stand up, shake it out. I got a little exercise for you. Stand up. Go ahead, stand up. All right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to hold out your arms straight out, thumbs up in the air, and I want you to clap once. All right, take your arms out. Now, raise your right hand, and I want you to cross it over your left wrist. Now, invert your hands so your thumbs are pointing down, and clasp your fingers. Now, the important thing here to make sure of is that your right thumb is hanging down. No, your right thumb. I need your right thumb hanging. There you go. Okay, right thumb hanging down. Now, how does this feel? This feels just a little bit uncomfortable. It feels a little awkward. Feels like you don't know what to do next. You aren't quite sure how to get out of this. So how come it is that some people can just easily get out of this and point their fingers forward? And they can make things happen for their future. Well, I believe that part of the reason for this is knowledge. And I believe if you have the knowledge to make things happen, then your future will have a clear path. So, what I want to talk to you today about is credit scoring. And I'm here to tell you that this is such an important factor in your life, not only for this mortgage loan to buy this first home for you, but for a lot of other areas in your life. So, you have in front of you a pamphlet and you have a little handout. So what I want to talk to you about is the 5 factors that affect your credit score. Let's talk about the very first one. The first one is your payment history. Now this makes sense, right? How well do you pay your bills? How come though, if you pay your bills every month on time, that you don't have an 850 credit score, which is the very highest that you can possibly get? I can also tell you that in 30 years of doing mortgage loans, I have never seen an 850 credit score. So what is a good credit score? Well, anything over 620 to 640 gives you the opportunity to buy a home. But that doesn't mean that it's without consequences. If you have a 740 or higher credit score, you're going to fit into the best bucket of loan programs. So how does this payment history work? Well, the payment history is 35% of your credit score, as it says right there in your pamphlets. And here's a couple of things I need you to know. If you have, say, a credit card that has a minimum $15 payment and a car loan that has a $300 payment, if you make a late payment on that $15 credit card versus the $300 car payment, you're going to see a bigger hit on your credit score with that higher payment versus the lower payment if you're more than 30 days late. Now I need you to keep that in mind, because just because you may pay a late fee if you're more than 15 days late, unless you're more than 30 days late, it will not report on your credit report as a late payment. The higher your payment, the bigger the hit on your credit score. If you go more than 30 days late, and you go to 60 or 90 days late, then you're going to see a bigger hit with the longer the late payment is. And if you end up having that account go into a collection account, or even worse, a judgment, you're going to see more points for the more severe that the late payment is. So within that 35% tier or category of your credit score, the bigger the payment, the harder the hit. The longer or the more delinquent that payment is, the bigger the hit. The other thing that's important to know is that if you're going to have any late payments, whatever happens in the most recent 12 months has a bigger impact than 12 to 24 months. And once the account is more than 24 months old, it has less and less and less effect on your credit score. So once you have a late payment that's more than 24 months old, then it's not going to impact you near as much as that first 1 to 12 months is. As a lender, we look very closely at what's happened in the most recent 12 months. Let's look at the next factor. The next factor is your balance to limits on your revolving credit cards. Now this does not count for your installment loans. So if you have a car loan, then your car loan starts off here and you're expected to pay until that car loan is paid off. With a revolving credit card, you have a limit of this, and depending on what you owe compared to that limit, will have a 30% effect on your credit score. Now remember, your credit payment history is 35% of your score. The balance compared to your limit is 30% of your score. This 30% out of a maximum of 850 points is 255 points of your score. And you know what? If you don't have a credit card at all, you will never get a score over 650 points, because you've got 255 points of your score is ranked on what you owe compared to your limit on that credit score. So here's what I want you to write down. You have this in your pamphlets in front of you in the handouts, but if you owe between 10 and 30% of your limit, then you're going to see your score go way up. So if you have a $1,000 credit card limit and you owe between $100 and $300 of that limit, you're going to see your score rise up very nicely. If you owe between 30 and 50% of your limit, you will see your score go up, but not near as much as if you owe that 10 to 30% of your limit. So if you have a credit card with a limit of $1,000 and you owe between $300 and $500, you will see your score go up, but not near as much as if you owe that 10 to 30%. Now, once you owe between 50 and 75% of your limit, so on that $1,000 card, if you owe between $500 and $750, you're going to start seeing your score go down. And if you owe between 75 and 100% of your limit, so on that $1,000 card, if you owe between $750 and $1,000, you are going to see your score drop right down to the floor. And you know what? If you owe $1,001 on that card, it's like credit score death. You're going to see your score plummet more than 100 points, I can guarantee you. Now here's something that a lot of people don't understand. When you get your credit card statement in the mail, if you owe, or when you look at that statement, it's going to say, here's your activity from this beginning date to this ending date. And you need to make a minimum payment by this due date way out here. Now, when you know that statement ending date, you're going to know that that's the date they print the statement, they mail it to you, you get it a few days later, you look at it, you either make a minimum payment or whatever payment you want to, and then they post that payment. But that credit statement ending date is the date that they report to the credit bureaus. So if you know you're over that 10 to 30% limit of that credit card, then you're going to want to know what that statement ending date is, and you're going to want to make that payment 3 or 4 days before that statement ending date, not that due date way out there, but that statement ending date, so that that payment can post before they report to the credit bureaus. I had a customer. She was employed with a big major corporation. He was a self-employed commercial fisherman. They had 5 joint credit cards together. Her company offered as an employee benefit a credit card that would allow them to transfer all of their balances to this new card at 0 interest, 0 charges for 24 months. So with these 5 cards, they owed $18,000. She was offered a brand new card for $20,000, and they transferred all 5 of these credit cards onto this brand new card. Her name was the only one on this card, his name was not. I pulled up their joint credit report. They were looking to refinance their home. When I pulled up their joint credit report, his credit score was 724. Her credit score was 623, 101 points lower than his. Even though they had been married for years, they had all the same joint accounts. His name was not on her new credit card, and her new credit card showed $18,000 owed against that $20,000 limit. 101 points it dropped her credit score. She was so angry. This makes every bit of sense to change from these high interest rate cards to this low interest rate or 0% interest rate card for 24 months to get rid of that balance. So in our real world, this makes perfectly good sense. In the credit scoring world, though, this made 0 sense. she owed $18,000 to that $20,000 limit. This meant she was almost maxed out on her credit score, on her credit card. And this had a 30% impact on her score. They promptly separated out that balance amongst the other 5 cards and worked on paying each one off as they could. My husband, he's self-employed. He owns a mechanic shop. He has a couple of credit cards that he uses just for business, and he puts engines and motors and parts and all kinds of stuff on these credit cards. And he waits for the statement to come in. He looks at that statement, he checks it off with all of his invoices, and then he writes a check and he pays it off in full every month. But he doesn't do this until he receives that statement in the mail, which is 3 or 4 days after they've reported that balance to the credit bureau. When we look at our joint credit report, his score is typically over 100 points lower than mine. So I just learned not to borrow money with him because I've talked to him about this before, and I'll tell him, okay, this credit card reports on this date, so go ahead and make the payment on this date, then get your statement, then check it off, reconcile it, do whatever you need to do for the business. And he gets a little bit grumbly with me and says, I pay my bills off every month, and so I should have good credit, and what the heck should I have to play this game for? But I'm telling you, if you don't know the rules to the game, you're not going to be able to win the game. How many times have you ever sat down and played Monopoly? Or do you remember the first time you ever sat down and played Monopoly? Even if you had the rule book in front of you, did you know the strategies behind those rules? Were you able to win the game just because you knew the rules? The problem with credit reporting is that most people don't know the rules. Most people don't know how to play the game. So what I've handed you is the rule book. Now let's talk about what if you don't have any credit card at all? What if you've chosen to pay cash for everything? Well, guess what? You're going to lose 30% of your score. You are not going to be able to get your score up any higher than 650 because the credit scoring software treats this like a snapshot. It takes a picture of the data that's provided to it. And if the data says there's no credit card, then it says, poof, there goes 30% of your score. That's 255 points. So you need to have some kind of a credit card in order to look at that balance to limit. And also remember, it doesn't say 0 to 30%. It says 10 to 30%. And so if you don't use that card, if you just get a credit card and stick it in your back pocket and never use it at all, then you're never going to see that improvement of the score because the data, the picture, is going to say, yes, you have this credit card, you've never used it, so you've never proven that you can manage this credit that has been offered to you. You've just chosen not to use it. I also run into clients that have made it a practice of theirs to just pay cash for everything that they own. Then they come in to buy the home, they don't have enough money to pay cash for that home. But because they've chosen to pay cash for everything, their purchases, their vehicles, furniture, whatever they want, they have never established any credit. They may be very young, they may be established, they may be elderly. And if you don't have these factors in your credit score, you are not going to see those highest credit scores, even though you have chosen to pay cash for everything. There's no proof that you're able to make monthly payments. Now the next factor is your length of time that you've had your credit. This is 15% of your score. So even if you have established some credit, you may have opened up a credit card, you may have never made a late payment on it, you may have a signature loan or a car loan or a student loan. If you haven't had that account for a minimum of 12 months with no late payments, then you're going to get dinged on your credit score. That length of credit that you've had your, a length of time that you've had your credit is 15% of that score. So one of the other things you need to keep in mind is that sometimes when you're trying to establish credit, if you get bigger, better, different credit cards in the future, or bigger, better, different loans in the future, you want to make sure that you don't close out these accounts that you've had for a number of years. So sometimes I will advise people to open up a new credit card, to open up a signature loan, just to establish some new credit for themselves. And then once they've established that credit and their credit has improved, then they're offered other new cards. So they'll take that new card and they'll close out their old one, and we'll see a 15% reduction in their credit report by closing out that old card. So just remember, if it doesn't cost you anything to have the card, whether you use it or not, you want to always keep it open because it's going to create that length of credit. You do need to remember that you want to use that card every 60 to 90 days, fill up your gas tank, pay it off, just to keep that card active in the credit scoring profile. Because if you don't use it for more than 90 days, it's going to drop off like you don't have it at all. Alright, so the next factor is the mix of credit. And so they like to see that you have at least one installment loan, like an auto loan. They like to see that you have 2 to 5 credit cards. Can you imagine that? Who's trying to tell you to manage your credit, and the credit scoring software wants you to have 2 to 5 credit cards? And then they'd like to see that mortgage loan. Now this is 10% of your score. So this is up to 85 points of your score. Now, obviously, you are typically first-time home buyers, so you don't have that mortgage loan on there yet. Once you do get that mortgage loan, you're going to see a boost in your credit score just by virtue of having that mortgage loan on there. If you don't have all of these factors, then remember this is the smallest point of your credit score versus how much you owe to your balances versus your late payments or your perfect payment history, and versus that length of time that you've had the credit. The next factor is your inquiries. So what are inquiries? Inquiries are people checking into your credit. They're people looking to see whether they should extend new credit to you, or whether how many other people have checked into your credit. Now there's soft inquiries and hard inquiries. The soft inquiries are things like you checking into your own credit, current creditors checking your credit, insurance companies, landlords, employers. Those are all soft inquiries. They will show up on your credit report, but they will not affect your score. The hard inquiry is going to be somebody like me checking your credit for the purposes of extending new credit to you. So the hard inquiries are going to be you seeking new credit, and those inquiries are going to affect your score. How much? Typically, they're going to affect your score between 3 and 15 points. Now the higher your credit score, the least effect that inquiry is going to have. The lower your credit score, the bigger effect it's going to have. Why? Because if you have really great credit and you've already proven yourself to be a creditworthy borrower, then you wouldn't probably inquire into new credit unless you thought you could afford it. And you've already proven yourself to be able to manage your debt. So it's going to have the smallest impact on your credit score. Now if you have a very low credit score, it's going to impact you higher, because if you can't manage the credit that you've got already, why the heck should we be loaning you more credit that you aren't going to be able to manage? So it's going to give you a higher hit on your credit score, and it's going to try to implode this ability for you to obtain new credit. Excuse me. So keeping in mind when you check your own credit, which is very prudent, we're going to talk about in just a second, then it does not have an effect on your credit score. Another thing about inquiries is that when you do major purchases, and the two that they recognize is buying a home or buying a vehicle. it would be prudent of you to check perhaps several different lenders to make sure that you're getting the best deal available. So when you're buying a home or buying a car, you may see multiple hard inquiries on your credit report. But when those happen within a 15-day period, then you're only going to get hit one time for those multiple inquiries. So even though I know one time I went to apply for a car, or to buy a new car, and they checked a dozen different lenders to see who was going to give me the best deal. And I saw all of those inquiries on my credit report, but it still only hit me one time. Speaking of which, you ever notice what the heck they're asking for these brand new cars these days? I remember I was looking at it, and this was a 2-year-old car, and I looked at that sticker price, and I looked around at the salesman, and he was pointing out all the features of this car, and I said, "And how many bathrooms does it have?" And he says, "It's a car, lady." I said, "Exactly. Why the heck does it have a home price range on it when it's just a stinking vehicle?" So anyway, when you're buying those two major purchases and they include a car as a major purchase along with a home, then you can have as many inquiries as you want to within that 15-day period, and it's only going to hit your score once. One of the other things we want to talk about is those soft inquiries, you checking your own credit. Now there's a couple of things that you should consider when checking your own credit. In 1971, they introduced the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now the Fair Credit Reporting Act has very significant rules for you. And one of those rules is that you should be allowed to check your own credit. Now in 1971, we didn't have the computer systems that we have. We didn't have the technology that we have now. And so in order for you to check your own credit, you would have to write to the 3 credit bureaus, which would be Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. You'd have to say either 1, I was turned down for credit and I need to see my report to find out why, or you would have to say, I am due my free credit report tonight and I want to take a look at it. And you could wait weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and they may or may not ever report it to you. And if they sent it to you, it was so coded that you couldn't understand it and you couldn't read it. Well, in about 1987, they came up with the revised Fair Credit Reporting Act. And with that, with the technology, then they created the annualcreditreport.com website that you're allowed to pull your own free credit report from each and every single year from all 3 credit bureaus. Now what I usually suggest to people is that if you go to annualcreditreport.com, then you pull it from one bureau and then you wait 4 months. You pull it from the next bureau and you wait 4 months. You pull it from the 3rd bureau, and when you wait 4 months, you're back at the beginning where you can pull it from the first one. And the reason why I suggest that is because that way you can check your credit 3 times a year from each of the 3 credit bureaus, rather than pulling all 3 of them from the first of the year and then having to wait a full 12 months before you ever look at it again for free. Some of the things I want you to be looking for on your credit report are not only those accounts and the balances and the payment history, but there's a lot of personal information on that credit report that you need to be very aware of that could affect your score. Part of those is going to be, of course, look at your accounts, make sure they belong to you. The next thing is going to be to look for any personal identification information. One of the biggest keys is going to be your date of birth. With all the social media out there, all of the internet information that's available, a lot of times you can find your month and year, but you can't always find the date, the day of birth. So if suddenly you see showing up on your credit report the 5th and you were born on the 15th, then you want to raise that red flag flying and dispute that date of birth, because that could be the red flag. Identity theft is the biggest crime in the world right now. And if you see something that doesn't fit, then you need to fly that red flag, and you need to start disputing that with each individual credit bureau. One of the other items is your addresses. You want to take a look down that address list. You want to make sure that every address that is reported for you is actually someplace that makes sense. Now keep in mind that sometimes you're going to see P.O. Box 123, and sometimes you'll see P.O. Box 123, and sometimes you'll see Box 123, and those all make sense. Those were all your mailing addresses. Just because there's a dot or not in there doesn't mean it wasn't your address. But if suddenly you see Box 321 and you never had that mailing address, that's a red flag flying. If suddenly you see that you lived at 123 Main Street and you really never did, that's a red flag. Those are the things that you're going to want to be paying attention to on your credit report, because if somebody's going to steal your identity, do you think they're going to send that bill to your correct address? Heck no, they're going to send it to some address that makes absolutely no sense, so that you don't get those bills, so that you're not alerted any sooner than necessary that there's a new account opened up in your name that you know nothing about. Employers are another red flag. If suddenly you see that you worked at ABC Company and you never really did work at ABC Company, then you want to make sure that you dispute that employer on your credit report. Because that's another thing. You know, these identity thieves, they work in these huge rings. They work in these big groups. And if they call it Visa and say, hey, Rhonda Johnson is applying for a Visa card, and she works at ABC Company, and she lives at 123 Main Street, then you can bet that when Visa calls up ABC Company and says, hey, does Rhonda Johnson work there? Somebody on the other line of that phone is going to say, why, yes, she does. They're going to start sending bills to 123 Main Street, but Rhonda Johnson is never going to know anything about this, because those bills are never going to be seen by me unless I'm checking my own credit report, seeing this new account opened, seeing a balance on that account, seeing that employer and that address, and unless I do something about it, nobody else is going to care as much as you do about your credit score. Another item that you want to look for on that credit report is any kind of public records. Any kind of judgments, defaults, tax liens, anything that's a public record, you want to make sure those actually belong to you, and you want to make sure that those are satisfied. If those public records are not satisfied, you will not ever get a mortgage loan. You will probably not get a car loan or a credit card either. Because those public records, what happens is, those public records are in date order. So say like we were going to offer you a loan to purchase a house, but you had an IRS tax lien out there. The IRS tax lien was recorded last year. We want to put you in title to the house this year. Well, that IRS tax lien is going to go in date priority as a lien against the title to your new home. So if the IRS says you owe $2,000 in back taxes, and they recorded a lien last year, then when we go to put your name on the title to that house, that IRS tax lien takes first lien holder position against our mortgage loan. We don't like that. So we're not going to allow you to go entitled to that house where the IRS could foreclose on your home for a $2,000 tax lien when we have maybe a $200,000 mortgage loan against you. So you want to be checking those public records. So you're going to want to check personal information, dates of birth. You're going to want to check addresses. You're going to want to check employment information. You're going to want to check public records, and you're going to want to check each of those accounts and make sure they really belong to you. If you have any questions, as explained in that book, then you want to dispute it. Why is this also important? Why does this credit score mean so much? Well, it used to be where we worked kind of on this two-bucket system. And if your score was 620 or below, then you fit in this bucket. And if your score was 620 or above, then you fit in this bucket. Well, in about 1990, well, no, let's say about 2009 or so, about 2009, the rules changed. And this 620 and below bucket, it's gone. It does not exist anymore. If you don't have at least a 620 or above bucket, you do not get a mortgage loan. And then what they did with the 620 and above bucket was they separated it out into a whole bunch of buckets. Now, if you have a score of under 660, then you can expect to pay about 3.25% higher in more fees than if you have a higher credit score. So 3.25% on a $200,000 house, that's almost $10,000 in more fees because you have a credit score of 660 or lower. If you have a score of 660 to 679, so below 680, then you can expect to pay about 2.25% in more fees than if you have a 740 or higher credit score. If your score is between 680 and 700, then you're still going to pay about 1.75% in higher fees than if you have a 740 or higher credit score. If your score is below 720, so if you're between 700 and 719, then you can expect to pay 1% in more fees at closing than if you were over a 720 or 740 credit score. So on $200,000, that's an extra $2,000 in more fees that you're going to pay just because you're under a 720 credit score. Even if you're 720 and you're under 740, then you can pay an extra 0.5% fee in closing or higher interest rates unless you're over 740. And even if you're at 740 and just below the 740 mark, then you can expect to pay an extra 0.25% in fees than if you're over the 740 mark. Now, what does all this mean to you? This could mean qualifying or not qualifying for your mortgage loan based on those monthly payments. It could mean getting the loan or not. It could mean that even though you qualify for the higher interest rate, unless you have 20% down, you may pay mortgage insurance. And the mortgage insurance premiums go with that same multi-bucket system. And your mortgage insurance premiums are also based on those credit scores and what bucket you fit into. Based on that bucket, we reach in and say, here's the rate, terms, and fees we're going to charge you based on that credit score. Sometimes, some other things that are affected by your credit score is going to be your car insurance premiums. Car insurance companies are going to pull your credit report, they're going to give you a quote, and they're going to quote you based on your credit score because your credit score is going to determine your willingness to pay, your responsibility factor. So they're going to determine that based on that credit score, if you are responsible as a credit payer, and if you've got a good credit score, then they're probably going to collect their premiums, and it just shows your responsibility. So based on that credit score, your car insurance companies may change your premiums. Your rate of pay with your employers may be affected. I had a nurse come up. She worked at a hospital in Tennessee, and the hospital that she worked for ranked her rate of pay based on her credit score. And if she had a 800 credit score, then her rate of pay went up over $1 an hour. Now that hospital felt that if you had your financial house in order, then you were going to be a more productive employee because you were going to be focusing on your job and not worrying about your bills and things happening at home financially. So they rewarded her with a higher rate of pay based on that credit score. What else could be affected by that credit score? Well, let me tell you this. My job. I've been doing this, well, in 2010, they decided that in order to do my job, we all had to be licensed. And in order to get that license, then I had to pass a state exam with 100 questions. I had to pass a national exam with 100 questions. I had to take 20 hours of continuing education. I had to do a 10-year background check with the FBI. I had to get fingerprinted, and I had to have my credit report pulled. After 28 years of doing mortgage loans and helping customers just like you, if any one of those things had failed, I would be out of a career. My job would be over. My career would be over. So this is how impactful that it is for you that you know what your credit score is. So a couple of things is that we talked about annualcreditreport.com. Now I want you to be able to go there and check your credit score 3 times a year, once for each of the 3 credit bureaus. Now when you get your credit score, you get your credit report from annualcreditreport.com for free, but you do not get your score for free. You may purchase your score there, and I think it's maybe $15-20 per score. You could also go to myfico, FICO.com, and you can pull your own credit report from myfico.com. Now that credit score that you're going to get there will look a little bit different than what we get as a mortgage credit score. And the reason why is because there are 8 potential positive things that can go on your credit report and 44 potential negative things. Well, when you're just pulling your own credit report, the algorithms of the credit scoring software doesn't know the reason for pulling that report. So they will say, based on not knowing the reason, we're going to use the smallest net possible to capture information. And so they're only going to capture a small portion of those potential 44 negative things that can go on your report. Now when you apply for a credit card, they're going to use a little bit bigger net, but not that big. When you apply for a car loan, they're going to use a little bit bigger net. And when we apply for a mortgage loan, we've got a 30-year relationship going on here. We are going to use the biggest net possible to capture as many of those 44 potential negative things as possible. So when you pull your own credit score, you're going to see a little bit different score than what we get on a mortgage report. One of the best places to pull your credit score is going to be myfico.com. myfico.com. With myfico.com, you're going to get as close to a mortgage credit score as possible. You will see some other scores that are higher and some other scores that are lower, but that one's going to get you pretty close. One of the other things you can look at if you're really into making sure that you're getting things cleaned up is creditkeeper.com. Creditkeeper.com is a monthly service. They're going to tell you every time a balance goes up, a balance goes down, somebody's checked into your report, a late payment, any change whatsoever throughout the month, they're going to report to you. So if you're very much interested in looking at what's happening on a daily basis to your credit report, then my creditkeeper.com is a really good site to look at. Now, in front of you, you have some entry forms, and what I would like to offer you today is this book by Linda Ferrari. It's called The Big Score. Now, this book is a testament of multiple, hundreds, thousands of credit scores that Linda Ferrari has looked at, and she's analyzed, and she has helped determine these algorithms of the credit scoring software of the credit bureaus to determine what those scores are going to do. In this book is samples of, if you have a dispute, what kind of letter should you write? If you think something isn't accurate, what you should do. So not only does it go through this information that we've talked about today, but it goes into much, much deeper detail about what you can do to help improve your credit score. So everybody fill out your entry forms, and I will do a drawing here in just a few minutes about to win a copy of this book. You'll be really, really amazed. So we were talking earlier about firsts, and you purchasing your first home, you purchasing your first investment property, you purchasing your first multifamily or first rental property, whatever. And I'd just like to close with this little story on why firsts are so important to me. In 1992, we adopted our daughter, and we weren't really looking to adopt children. My husband already had 2 children, I already had 2 children, and this wasn't kind of part of our big major plan, but she was a little girl that needed a home, and we chose to make that decision to adopt her. About 4 or 5 years later, in about 1998, I guess, we received this phone call that said, you know what, your daughter has 2 brothers, and they're in desperate need of a home. They are U.S. citizens. They currently are living in El Salvador. They're living there with their father, who was deported out of the country. These 2 little boys are 2 and 4 years old, and they're very ill. The youngest one, Taylor, may not make it if we don't get them out of that country and into a good family home. Would you consider taking them on? Oh my gosh, we're thinking, we already have 5 kids. Our home really isn't set up for 2 more kids, for 7 kids. Are we in a position financially, mentally, money-wise, financially, can we really give them the best that we can, that they deserve as children? We struggled with this for just a little bit. My husband and I agreed, there's no question. There's no way in the world that we couldn't possibly provide a home to these 2 little boys that might not have a life if we didn't do this for them. How could we possibly tell our daughter that we had the opportunity to adopt her little brothers and give them a home and chose not to? So we agreed, we're going to take on these 2 little boys. So we go to the airport. They're escorted off the airplane by the stewardess, and they're, like I said, they're 2 and 4, and they have 1 little duffel bag. It's April. We live in Alaska. They're dressed in tank tops and little shorts and sandals. It's pretty chilly outside, so we dig through their duffel bags to look for some more clothes, and that's all it's full of. T-shirts, tank tops, shorts, and 2 6-packs of Coca-Cola. So we take off our coats, we wrap them around our little boys, we rush out to the car, and immediately run to the local Walmart to grab some more appropriate clothes for them for our location. And we brought them shoes, and there was still snow on the ground, and it was still chilly. So we come home, and we realize they don't even speak English. They speak Spanish. They're from El Salvador. They're still young enough to where they never learned English, really, and the time that they had spent in El Salvador was all speaking Spanish. So we didn't have any way to communicate with each other. I remember we're all standing in the kitchen, and we had red popsicles. Now our youngest son, Taylor, had, it was cheaper to buy Coca-Cola than good drinking water. And so his poor little teeth were just rotted right down to their gums. And we had an appointment to take him into the dentist and get this taken care of, but he hadn't been there yet. So we're all in the kitchen, we're eating some popsicles, and he just starts crying. He's screaming, he's crying. I don't know what's wrong. He's talking. I don't understand him. I don't know what's going on. I didn't know whether this popsicle was hurting his teeth, whether he was getting one of those brain freeze things going on, or what was happening. Finally, he looks at me and he just points down to his shoe. He had on these brand new little white tennis shoes, and he had a little red drip on that white tennis shoe. And it just upset him so much that his little white tennis shoe got dirty. So I took a paper towel, I wiped it off, and he was fine. He started eating his popsicle again. The older son, the 4-year-old, had his first birthday in August. He was turning 5. We didn't know that he had never had a birthday before. So we gather all of our friends and our family, and we make the cake. We put 5 birthday candles on the cake. We're all standing around, and we tell him, blow out the candles, make a wish. And he just looks at us like he does not understand. So again, we're pointing to the candles, and we're all standing around, we're saying, blow out the candles. And we're trying to show him how to blow out the candles without actually blowing out the candles ourselves. Finally, he takes this big breath. And he blows out all 5 candles. We all clap and we say, yay! he gets this grin on his face from ear to ear. Oh my God, it was so cute. And like he has just solved the problems of the entire world because he blew out his 5 candles. We have him open up the presents, and he carefully peels off each piece of tape so that he doesn't rip the wrapping paper. He opens it up, and all the other little kids are saying, ooh and ah, and oh, I like that, oh, I wish I had that. And he would just hand it off to them. He didn't realize they were his presents. He was just having a blast carefully opening up every one of those presents. But when he opened up his football, he looked at that, and his eyes just got wide. And he took that football and he stuffed it down beside him where none of the other kids could see it. And we realized we were experiencing this first birthday with him. This first birthday party at the age of 5. We'd bought him a bicycle, and it was in the living room on his little kickstand with the training wheels. We picked him up and we set him on it, and we could see him. He's just shaking, his hands on the handlebars. We put his feet on the pedals, and his little legs and his little feet were just shaking away. And we finally took him outside and let him start pedaling and riding it. I'm not quite sure why we started that, because today he's a demon on a dirt bike. That child is wild. Christmas time comes in December, and we make a big production out of going to dress up in all of our winter clothes, hop on the snow machine, we go up to the woods, we cut down a tree, we're drinking hot chocolate from the thermos, we're having a great old time. We drag the tree back home on a sled, and we get ready to kind of stuff it through the door. And he says, whoa, whoa, wait you people. That tree belongs outside. This is my house. Trees don't belong in my house. We said, it's okay, you're going to like this, don't worry. So we finally bring the tree in the house, and we get ready to set it up in the stand. And we get ready to decorate it. And he says, okay, now wait, hold on. What are you going to do? Are you going to cut a hole in the floor to stick this tree down? Because, see, he knew enough to know that trees belong in the dirt, and that there's probably dirt underneath our floor, and that trees needed to be, if not outside, at least in the dirt. So we explained, no, we're going to just put it in some water, and you're going to like this, don't worry, hang on. So we have them decorate the tree, we get the star on top, and we light it up, and we have a really cool evening. And then we start putting the presents underneath the tree. And he's thinking, aha, well, I remember my birthday from just a few months ago, and that was pretty cool, so this might be all right. Christmas comes and goes, and it's New Year's now, and we start undecorating the tree, get everything put away, get ready to take the tree outside, and he goes to his little cubby hole. And he puts on his boots and his snow pants and his coat and his hats and his gloves. And we're like, well, what are you doing? Where are you going? And he says, that was pretty fun. Let's go do that again. Let's go get another tree. So we realized that we had this whole year of firsts with these kids. They'd never had that birthday or that Christmas, that Easter, that Halloween, none of the holidays, none of the celebrations. And it was an absolute blast. It was so fun to see that discovery, that wonderment, that enjoyment that these kids had. And so that is why I feel so passionate about working with people buying their first home, their first condo, their first investment property, their first multifamily. It is so fun for me. Even though I've been there, done that, and even with my kids before, it gives me the biggest pleasure in my life to be able to offer that experience to you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your class, and if you have any questions whatsoever, you make sure you give me a call. Have an awesome night.